In the Willow Creek neighborhood, a 27-year-old man named Alex Turner, who had just moved from California, leaned against the window frame in his living room, gazing at the old oak tree in his front yard. The tree's gnarled roots rose like giant pythons, casting a cool shade over the dark brown wooden swing, a final gift from his late grandfather. He planted it in 1960, Alex whispered, his fingers lightly tracing the faded family photo on the shelf. In the picture, his grandfather, wearing a torn flannel shirt and holding a hoe, stood next to the young oak tree, which was then only chest-high. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind, "An oak tree takes 50 years to mature, my boy. But it will outlive us all." The tranquility was shattered by the roar of a truck engine in the distance. A sleek white SUV screeched to a halt in front of the gate, and a thin woman in a pink pantsuit stepped out. Karen Whitmore, the 45-year-old HOA president, descended with the demeanor of a commanding officer. Her Gucci sunglasses obscured half her face but couldn't hide the wrinkles at the corners of her mouth, a testament to her authoritarian nature. "Miss Turner," she said sharply, her voice like a blade as she handed over an ivory-colored envelope emblazoned with the HOA's golden logo, "this is the third notice regarding the removal of the hazardous obstruction before July 15th. Alex took the paper, his eyes scanning the bold text. "Oak tree at 42 Willow Creek violates Section 7.5, risk of collapse. Removal required within 72 hours. Risk of collapse? Alex scoffed, pointing to the oak tree that had withstood last year's snowstorm. "I hired an expert. Here's his report: root depth of 4.5 meters, no signs of rot. They even called it a model tree." Karen snatched the documents from Alex's hands, her icy blue eyes scanning each page. "Your expert," she emphasized each word, "is not HOA approved. According to Section 12.3 of the bylaws, all risk assessments must be approved by our safety committee." The summer breeze suddenly stilled. An oak leaf fluttered between them like a suspended question mark. "Then I'll file a complaint," Alex said through gritted teeth, clutching the wooden bracelet his grandfather had carved for him when he was 10. "This tree was here before you were born. Are you going to destroy history just because of some ridiculous rules?" The wrinkles around Karen's mouth twitched. She stepped closer, the overpowering scent of Chanel No. 5 filling Alex's nostrils. "Who do you think you are? Some California brat coming here to lecture us about the law?" Her voice turned shrill. "I've been HOA president for 12 years. House number 15 refused to repaint last year, and I took them to court. House number 28 dared to hang a football flag out of season, and I fined them $500 a day. And you," her diamond-laden finger jabbed at Alex's chest, "will learn the same lesson." That afternoon, Alex sat in the city library, the yellowed light casting shadows over the thick HOA bylaws. Sweat dampened his back as he discovered Section 22.4, all trees over 6 meters tall must be at least 10 meters from any structure. His oak tree was only 8 meters from his house. "No way," he muttered, flipping through a 1980 land survey. The faded ink revealed that the property boundaries had been adjusted. The original house was built to the west, but the previous owner had expanded eastward in 2005. This renovation had placed the oak tree in the danger zone. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Hello? This is Mark from house number 39, a man's husky voice whispered. "My friend at the city's landscaping company said she's planning to cut down your tree. Be careful. Last year, she shut off my sprinkler system because my flower pot was the wrong color." That night, Alex tossed and turned in front of his computer. Reddit forums were ablaze with hundreds of horror stories about HOAs, a man fined for leaving his car half-washed, an 80-year-old woman evicted for not mowing her lawn while hospitalized. He opened an email to his local lawyer attaching the expert report and the land survey. "They can't do this," the reply made his heart race, "but HOAs in Texas have the right to take you to court. We need." The doorbell rang sharply at 7 a.m. the next morning. Karen stood there with 2 uniformed officers holding a thick stack of documents. "This is a court-issued emergency order," she declared triumphantly. "You have 48 hours to prove that tree is safe. Otherwise, I already have an expert." Alex held up the sealed envelope. One officer shook his head. "This report needs to be verified. In the meantime, the HOA has the right to take preventive measures." Karen smiled faintly, her eyes glinting like a cat that had caught a mouse. "I suggest you cooperate. Either you cut it down yourself, or we will, and you'll foot the bill." As the SUV disappeared, Alex punched the wall. Pain shot from his knuckles to his heart. He stared at the oak tree swaying in the wind, its leaves rustling like a sigh. Somewhere inside the hollow trunk, the sound of termites chewing wood echoed like a ticking clock. 2 days later, the HOA meeting room was packed. Karen stood at the podium, tapping a laser pointer on a colorful PowerPoint slide. Tree collapse rates in Texas have risen 30%. Average insurance damage of $15,000. This is due to the selfishness of certain members. Alex's bloodshot eyes fixed on a photoshopped image of the oak tree falling onto a neighbor's house. He stood up, his voice trembling. I have an independent report from Texas A&M. Time's up. Karen slammed the gavel. Vote, support the emergency tree removal. Raise your hands. 12 out of 15 hands went up, all unfamiliar faces to Alex. It's done, Karen said sweetly. Tomorrow, the tree removal team will arrive. You might want to put away that old swing of yours. On the final night, Alex sat beneath the oak tree, clutching a withered yellow leaf. He whispered an apology to the memory of his grandfather. In the distance, thunder rumbled softly. The first storm of the season was forming over the Gulf of Mexico. Before the sun could rise above the distant mountains, the roar of a diesel engine tore through the thin morning mist over Willow Creek. Alex jolted awake, his heart pounding as he recognized the familiar sound, the high-pitched whine of a chainsaw, hungry and relentless. He rushed to the window, bare feet stepping on shards of glass from the lamp he had knocked over the night before. 4 men in orange reflective vests surrounded the oak tree. A cheaply branded crane truck labeled Super Fast Tree Removal sat heavily on Alex's lawn, its tires leaving deep gouges in the grass. The crew leader, gripping a heavy chainsaw, turned to Karen. She stood on the other side of the fence, phone pressed to her ear, wearing a glossy leather jacket that shimmered like a beetle's shell. No. Stop right now. Alex shouted, sprinting across the yard. The acrid smell of engine oil hit him as he grabbed the worker's sleeve. You can't cut it down. This is my property. Karen stepped forward, her black stilettos slicing through the damp grass like knives. By the court's temporary order, she waved a freshly stamped document in Alex's face, the red seal still glistening. The HOA has the authority to take preventive measures. If you want to complain, call your lawyer. The youngest worker frowned, eyeing the oak's trunk, which bore decades of carved initials. Ma'am, this tree leans 15 degrees northwest. If we cut from the east, it could fall unpredictably. I'm paying you to work, not to lecture me. Karen snapped, her finger tapping impatiently on her Rolex. Cut it from the base. I want this thing gone by 9 a.m. Alex lunged for the chainsaw, gripping the handle with both hands. I filed an appeal. You have no right. A heavy hand clamped down on his arm. The police officer who had accompanied Karen tightened a pair of handcuffs around Alex's wrists. You're obstructing official duties, he said flatly, as if reading from a script. If you continue, I'll arrest you for resisting. As they struggled, the chainsaw bit into the tree. Wood chips flew like blood, and pieces of the oak's century-old bark scattered to the ground. Alex screamed, tears mixing with sweat, but his voice was drowned out by the machine's relentless roar. He watched in horror as each ring of the tree, layers of history dating back to Kennedy's era, was torn apart by the merciless blade. Grandpa! Alex murmured, his mind swirling with images of his grandfather watering the young sapling. His voice echoed in Alex's delirium. Trees are like people, my boy. They suffer in silence. By 8:17 a.m., the tree was cut to a 70-degree angle. Suddenly, the wind picked up and the branches groaned like a wounded beast. The crew leader paused, his face pale as black sap oozed from the jagged cut. Stop. It's about to fall. But Karen grabbed the walkie-talkie. Keep cutting. I'm not paying you to watch the wind change. Alex's phone rang. His lawyer, Mrs. Marlowe, shouted through the speaker. The court just revoked the emergency order. They have no right to cut the tree without. A deafening crack split the air. The oak tree shuddered violently, leaning toward the west, where Karen's house stood just 20 meters away. The crew screamed, dropping their tools and scrambling for the crane. Karen froze, her face drained of color as the shadow of the massive trunk loomed over her. But the tree didn't fall. It stopped at a 45-degree angle, its roots jutting out like broken teeth, vines and severed roots dangling like entrails. The scene looked like a grotesque caricature. Half the tree suspended in midair, the other half reduced to ruins, sap dripping like tears. You idiots! Karen slapped the crew leader across the face. How dare you mess this up? You forced us to keep going, he roared, pointing at the precariously leaning tree. Now the whole neighborhood is a ticking time bomb. We need to call a professional team. Alex collapsed to the ground, his fingers brushing the fresh sawdust that still smelled of wood. He picked up a piece of bark etched with JT 1960, his grandfather James Turner's initials. His sigh blended with the wail of approaching police sirens. The city's safety officer, Mr. Grady, his face red with fury, pointed at Karen. "Are you insane? This is a protected mature tree under Environmental Law 203. Karen smirked, pulling a stack of documents from her Hermes bag. "This is an emergency permit from the city council. The signature is on page 3. Grady flipped through it, his eyes narrowing at the expertly forged signature. "What the hell? I never signed this." "You might want to check your memory," Karen interrupted, her tone threatening. "Either we both stay quiet, or I reveal your little land bribery scandal from 2018. Neighbors began to gather. Mark, the kind-hearted neighbor, spoke up. "We'll testify. She deliberately destroyed property." "Shut up," Karen yelled, her hair disheveled like a madwoman. "All of you are violating HOA rules. House number 39's grass is over 3 inches. House number 28 left their trash out past 6 a.m. The tension was palpable. Alex noticed someone's phone camera live-streaming the scene. He stood up, his voice filled with rage. "Do you all see now? She's willing to destroy history and endanger this neighborhood just to feed her ego." Karen flinched, her eyes darting to the leaning oak. She lowered her voice, suddenly sweet. "Come on, Alex. I'll compensate you with a new tree. Maybe even a small pool? We don't need to take this to court." "No," Alex said, his voice colder than ice. "You'll pay for this." That night, the neighborhood was restless. The oak tree creaked with every gust of wind, like a haunting curse. Karen sat in her office, trembling hands flipping through the contract with the cheap tree removal company. The clause, "not responsible for damages caused by natural disasters," made her break into a cold sweat. Meanwhile, Alex and his lawyer, Marlowe, reviewed footage from the security camera. "Look here." Marlowe paused the video of Karen slipping an envelope to the court clerk. "I've sent this to an investigative reporter at the Houston Chronicle. By tomorrow, everything will explode." But before dawn, the sound of a helicopter echoed across the darkened sky. A breaking news alert flashed on TV. Category 3 hurricane changes course, making landfall in Texas within 24 hours. Alex looked out the window. The battered oak tree swayed in the wind, its skeletal branches clawing toward Karen's mansion like a vengeful beast. He grabbed his phone and dialed the emergency rescue number. "Please send a team to remove the tree. It's about to fall." "Sorry, all rescue teams are evacuating coastal areas," the operator replied. "You'll need to evacuate yourselves." The doorbell rang abruptly. Mark stood on the porch holding a chainsaw. "Me and some neighbors are here to help. We need to cut down the dangerous part before the storm hits." But Karen was already there, a pistol in her hand. "This is HOA property. Anyone who touches that tree will be shot." The wind whipped her silk nightgown, revealing her trembling legs. Under the streetlight, Karen looked more like a deranged moth than the powerful HOA president. Alex sighed and returned to his room. On the desk, a photo of his grandfather smiled warmly beside the young oak. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandpa." Outside, the first drops of rain fell like a blood-soaked prophecy. The sky was pitch black, with swirling clouds forming a massive funnel over the Gulf of Mexico. The wind howled in long gusts, tearing down billboards and shredding paper decorations on porches. Hurricane Harlan, a Category 3 storm, had unexpectedly changed course and was barreling straight toward Willow Creek with 120 miles per hour winds. In her marble-floored kitchen, Karen frantically taped X-shaped patterns on the windows. Her husband, Richard, a usually indifferent real estate lawyer, was panicking for the first time. "Did you call the insurance company? That tree is about to fall on our house." "Shut up," Karen snapped, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. "I already hired someone to secure it," she lied. In her bag, the contract with the tree rescue company had been torn up 2 days ago. Karen had refused to pay the additional $10,000 emergency fee. A few houses away, Alex huddled in the basement, clutching a wooden box containing his grandfather's belongings. The wind howled through the window cracks like ghostly laughter. He looked up at the ceiling, where the sound of hailstones pounded like thousands of tiny bullets. Will the oak tree fall on my house? The thought made his stomach twist. But then he remembered the tree's 45-degree lean. A simple calculation flashed in his mind. Lean angle plus northeast wind equals direction of fall toward. Oh my God! Alex exclaimed, bolting upstairs. Through the shattered window, he saw the oak tree straining against the wind. Each root snapping sent a horrifying crack through the air. The tree swayed like a giant roly-poly, tilting toward Karen's white mansion. At 9:17 p.m., a lightning strike hit a nearby antenna, splitting the night open. The flash illuminated the neighborhood, revealing a terrifying scene. The century-old oak tree snapped like a twig, crashing down with terrifying speed. "Richard, run!" Karen screamed as the massive shadow engulfed the bedroom wall. The couple dashed down the stairs, bare feet stepping on broken glass. They barely made it to the hallway before the entire second floor collapsed with a ground-shaking roar. The oak tree pierced through the roof like a hot knife through butter. Branches as thick as a person's torso smashed the Italian leather sofa and crushed the $10,000 wine cabinet. One branch stabbed straight into Karen's portrait that once hung proudly in the living room. Her painted eyes torn open, revealing the rough plaster beneath. Outside, Alex and a few brave neighbors ran through the pouring rain. Flashlights illuminated the wreckage. Karen sat slumped on the wet tiles, her silk robe covered in sawdust. Richard clutched his head, blood from a cut on his hand spreading like abstract art. "Call 911. Mark shouted, but cell service had been down for hours. Alex stood silently, taking in the scene. The smell of oak sap mixed with leaking gas created a suffocating atmosphere. He stepped over the broken danger zone sign and approached the tree's uprooted base. In the deep hole, something glinted. A rusted blue tin box, its string frayed. "I found it, Grandpa," Alex whispered, trembling as he opened the box his grandfather had mentioned in bedtime stories. Inside was a yellow journal with black and white photos and a pocket watch stopped at 9:07 a.m. on November 22, 1963. The exact moment President Kennedy was assassinated. Scrawled on the first page, "To my future grandson, this oak tree is our family's compass. Its roots always point west, toward the underground stream." The wail of rescue sirens cut through the rain. The rescue team used hydraulic saws to cut through the debris. "Is anyone else alive?" a worker shouted. "Just these two." Alex pointed to Karen, who was curled up in shock. "But check the house's structure. The steel beams are..." A faint moan interrupted him. A crystal chandelier fell, revealing a bloodied arm sticking out from a collapsed wardrobe. "Help me," a weak female voice pleaded. Karen recognized the wedding ring glinting on the finger. "Claire, my daughter." She crawled toward the wreckage, but her scraped knees gave out. "She just came home from college this morning. Save her. Save her." The rescue team scanned the rubble with thermal imaging. "Signs of life. Prepare to pump concrete." Alex looked down at the journal in his hands. Page 43 had a hand-drawn diagram of the area's geology. The clay layer to the west is softer due to underground water flow. The tree's roots naturally lean toward it to absorb moisture. He glanced at the fallen oak. Just as the diagram showed, the roots pointed west, toward Karen's mansion. The rescue leader shouted into his walkie-talkie, "We need more excavators. The victim is trapped under a concrete beam," and a dry explosion erupted. Flames burst from a broken gas line, engulfing the scene. Karen screamed in agony as the fire lit up the night, where her daughter was still trapped. Alex pulled Mark back. "We need to go. The whole block could blow." But Karen was beyond reason. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from a police car and charged into the inferno. "Claire, Mommy's here. Hang on." The horrific scene unfolded in the firelight. Karen wrestled with flames licking at her hair, pulling at the wooden wardrobe pinning her daughter. When the fire team finally dragged them out, Claire was unconscious. her body covered in severe burns. Karen's face was scorched, but her hollow eyes were more terrifying than the flames. The next morning, the sun rose over a blood-red sky. The oak tree lay sprawled amidst the rubble, its roots exposed like pleading fingers. Reporters swarmed the scene, cameras focusing on Alex as he handed the journal to the police chief. "Everything is written here," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. If she had just read it, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. In the ambulance, Karen clutched her bandaged face, her daughter's faint words echoing in her ears. "You destroyed everything." The wind carried the acrid smell of ash through the neighborhood. On Alex's property, a young oak sprout emerged from the cracked ground. A seed from the last acorn the old tree had dropped before it fell. The sun rose high, casting light on the long cracks that scarred Willow Creek streets like wounds. The ruins of Karen's house were covered in a layer of white dust, a toxic mix of plaster and ash that forced the entire neighborhood to wear masks. Alex stood before the barbed wire fence the police had erected, his eyes fixed on the crooked danger collapse risk sign hanging from the dry oak branch. Inside the makeshift investigation tent, the environmental inspector tapped his pen loudly on a thick report. Root depth of 4.8 meters, no signs of rot. Natural lean of 12 degrees westward due to the clay layer. Completely not the tree owner's fault. He glanced at Karen, who sat on the ground, her face bandaged, only her bloodshot eyes visible. "You forged the Department of Construction's signature and hired an unlicensed tree removal team." The police chief slammed a stack of documents on the table. "And here's evidence of bribing a judge to obtain the emergency order." Karen flinched when she saw the covert photo of her handing an envelope to the court clerk. That was a charitable donation," she stammered, but no one paid her any attention. Outside, the roar of bulldozers flattened the rubble. Karen's luxurious bed was crushed under the blade, revealing a warped safe. A field agent opened it. Inside were forged land deeds, compromising photos of the mayor, and a journal meticulously documenting threats against residents. "No, that's fabricated," Karen screamed as reporters swarmed to photograph the evidence. She lunged for the documents but was pulled back by police, revealing a faded tattoo on her neck. "HOA is the law." Alex, led by his lawyer Marlowe, stepped up to the microphone. He held up the geological report from his grandfather's journal. This oak tree naturally adjusted its lean to tap into the underground water stream. If she had listened to science instead of her arrogance. The crowd erupted in anger as the large screen displayed security footage from a neighbor's camera. Karen bribing the tree removal team to get it done cheap. A mother holding her young daughter stepped forward, her voice choked with emotion. "That tree was where the kids played hide and seek. Now my child has lost her playground because of her." The courtroom drama unfolded like a tragicomedy. Karen's lawyer tried to blame community pressure, but the evidence was overwhelming. At the last moment, Richard, her husband, suddenly testified. She once threatened to poison the dog at house number 15 when they reported her violations. The verdict was met with thunderous applause. Karen was ordered to pay $750,000 in compensation to Alex, $2 million for neighborhood infrastructure repairs, and 200 hours of community service. The HOA President Karen Whitmore sign was taken down and burned in the community center square. Late that afternoon, Alex picked up a shovel and dug into the soil in front of his house. He gently placed the acorn he had found in the rubble into the hole, covering it with compost made from the old oak's wood chips. Mark and other neighbors arrived, each carrying buckets of water and young saplings. "We want to replant the forest," an elderly man said, his trembling hands tying a red ribbon around a young maple. "So no child has to grow up under the shadow of tyranny." Suddenly, the rumble of an engine interrupted. A moving truck loaded with belongings stopped in front of Karen's house. Claire, her face still bandaged, threw boxes onto the street. "She has no power left," the young woman said to Alex through tears. "I'm sorry for everything." As night fell, Alex lit candles around the newly planted sapling. The golden flames illuminated the inscription on a piece of the old oak. This tree taught us the lessons of patience and humility. 1960 to 2023. Unexpectedly, the doorbell rang. A man in a suit flashed a forestry badge. We've discovered that the old oak's root system is regenerating. New shoots are sprouting from the cut. They walked into the yard. Under the moonlight, tiny green buds were emerging from the fallen trunk. A sideways growing oak, twisting like a natural monument. Nature always finds a way to correct human mistakes, the forester whispered. The next morning, the local newspaper's front page featured a photo of Alex watering the sapling beside an editorial. HOA now stands for Hope and Oak Association, where life grows from the ruins of power. Meanwhile, at a makeshift clinic by the roadside, Karen sat huddled in a corner. Her left hand trembled as she filled out a job application for a hair salon, the only place that would accept someone with her record. Her wedding ring had been sold to cover her daughter's medical bills. Suddenly, the cheerful chatter of children outside caught her attention. A group of students was watering young trees planted along the sidewalk. A little girl stared at Karen. "Do you want to help us? My teacher said planting trees is how we say sorry to the earth." Karen stood up, her tattered dress fluttering. For the first time in decades, she walked without her high heels. Her bare feet touched the damp soil, each toe sinking into the warm, rich earth. The first drops of rain fell, mingling with her hot tears. On the clinic's peeling wall, a faded poster read, "Trees don't discriminate. They shade both the murderer and the saint." At the corner of the street, Alex's young oak sapling swayed in the breeze. A small sparrow perched on its branch, preening its glossy feathers in the sunlight. It sang a pure, clear melody, a natural symphony unheard in Willow Creek for the 12 years of Karen's reign. And somewhere deep underground, a new root system was silently stretching toward the 20-meter deep water table. A place where the flow knows no borders, no laws, only the rhythm of life itself.